I would say I'm not usually the type to discuss my problems or whatever's happening in my life, but sometimes it's important to let people know because you never know what sort of support you'll receive.
Hello and welcome to the Magnetica podcast. This is a podcast by two 20-something friends, Kim and Phil. We catch whatever life throws at us and try to make sense of it by sharing our thoughts and opinions. Magnetica will be full of great moments, so many oops, ifs, laughters, and tears of maneuvering life as young African women. If you want to have a great time and share in our experiment, tag along. Let's journey on together.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Magnetica podcast. Thank you for always coming back to listen to us. If you're new here, thank you for listening to this particular episode. Today, we are discussing a very sensitive, sometimes heavy topic. It's the topic of losing a loved one through death or through other experiences. But today, we'll actually be having this conversation with Frank, who has agreed to come and have this tough conversation with all of us, share his experience. Frank has been here before, actually. I need to say that. We used to study together at the university. He lost his father last year. So he's going to take us through the experience, how he found out, what he felt, so that for those of us who have never lost someone who's so close, can sort of experience what he experienced. I say sort of because I'm not sure through thinking about it, we can really understand how it feels, but we can empathize with that experience. And when it happens to us, because death is inevitable, we'll be able to, remember what Frank said and think to ourselves, okay, it's doable. We can manage, we can keep up. So, Frank, introduce yourself and let us know how your day is going.
Hi, Purity. Thanks for having me here. So, as mentioned, we were in university together, different courses. It was a nice time. Fewer responsibilities. It was fun. Yeah, so brief intro about me. I work in IT. I have very many interests, but I think chief among my interests is motorcycles. I don't know why, but they just arouse my interest a lot. With that out of the way, I think just to begin, my dad was the last person I lost. Well, not the last one, but I think it was the heaviest loss I had last year, because I had two losses actually. I lost my dad, and I also lost my mother's brother, my uncle. So I lost two family members last year, and it was just within 3 months of one another. I really didn't know how to process both of them. Now, I'll just begin with my dad. My dad was slightly older. He was 72 when he passed. He had some health issues. As I remember it, in November, he was having some health complications. He was not as strong. He was not as active. He would spend a lot of time indoors. And he just wasn't as cheerful as he used to be, because he was a really cheerful guy. So in December now, around Christmas time, or like a few days leading up to Christmas, my dad was not feeling so good. So the key things were he just could not stand up on his own, like on his own 2 feet. He needed assistance. So I used to assist him. I would lift him up, and he would have his shoulder around mine and walk him around the house. And other people who lived with him, because at that point also I was not living at home anymore. I live alone. So that's mostly when I would visit. But the people who were living with him were my mother and a cousin of mine. So they were the ones who were assisting him physically when he could not assist himself, so to speak. So that was one sign. The second thing was he could not use the loo anymore, like so easily. So he would go to the bathroom and spend an hour there, spend a lot of time there. And it was strange, worrying, a bit strange. But we figured maybe it's just old age, As you get older, your body doesn't function the way it used to. So we thought, we didn't really think it was any major cause for alarm. Now, around Christmas, I guess that was the last phone call I had with him. He called me, told me he wanted us to have like a small get-together at home, buy a lot of food, hang out with one another. And we did that. It was a good day on the 25th of December 2021. Everyone was there. Me, him, my mom, my sister's kids, some other relatives also came by. And we all had fun. So I spent the night at home because I live alone, so I really had nothing to come back to. So I stayed back home with my parents, and my dad was experiencing the same complications. At this point, he had not used the loo for about 2 days, and it was becoming really worrisome. So on the 26th, we tried to give him laxatives, which kind of worked, and we thought we solved the issue until now. By the 27th and the 28th, he still could not go to the loo. So we took it upon ourselves to take him to hospital. I won't name the hospitals, but we took him to a certain hospital. And the first thing we were told is this guy is above 70, so he's no longer covered by insurance, which was a huge bummer because he had insurance under my mother, because as long as you are someone's dependent, you're covered under the insurance. That's private insurance. So that first hospital turned him down despite making us pay a consultation fee of about 5 Gs. So because finances were a bit of an issue, we opted to take him to a different hospital around where we live. So we did that. But the thing is that this was not really a fully fledged hospital, because the end goal was to take him to Kenyatta Hospital, since NHIF does cover people who are over 70, and his NHIF was very much valid and active. But according to the system we have, you can't take someone to a level 5 hospital directly until you've first taken them to the smaller hospitals within your locality and gotten them a referral. So we took him to a smaller hospital where they didn't really give us any conclusive information about what was wrong with him. And, they just kept doing all these tests. And obviously, I guess hospitals are a business. That's the morbid way to look up at it. So since a hospital is a business, it must make profit. And they recommended all these tests, which we did for him, which cost us a huge sum of money. But, I figured this, my dad, there's really no one else I would spend this money on. So we did get him through those tests, and he was just getting worse at the hospital. Definitely couldn't move around. His legs were swelling, what's known as edema. I think you heard about it in high school, where you have like excess protein being deposited into your appendages or something like that. And apart from that, he had difficulty breathing and he was getting confused. So, we mobilized, and my family, everyone, a lot of people were involved, and we got a referral and took him to Kenyatta National Hospital. I know I said I wouldn't name hospitals, but I have named one because I guess that's the only hospital I can name at this point. So we got him to hospital, and I remember we spent a whole night admitting him. That was just on New Year's, on the eve of New Year's. We spent the whole night admitting him into hospital. But, you do what you can for the people who are important to you. So it didn't really bother me. If anything, I was ready to do anything and everything to keep him alive. And that we did. So we finished up in the hospital. Nobody slept. Then we all went home. So for the next 3 or 4 weeks, he was still in hospital. He was making progress. I would usually take off some time from work, maybe 2 or 3 hours, just to go and visit him as often as I could. So I'd make sure I'd see him at least 3 to 5 times a week for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And he was definitely making progress, but his appetite was gone completely. You would give him some food, he would take like 2 or 3 bites and he would be done. Then on top of that, he would always make demands to see everybody. Like he would ask, where's the firstborn? Where's the secondborn? Where are their kids? Where are you? Where are my friends? So at that point, I was kind of like, okay, this guy might go. I really don't know if he'll make it, because once he was making all these requests to see everybody, even people he was not on very good terms with, I was very skeptical about whether he would make it. But interestingly enough, on the 30th of January, rather on the 26th of January, the hospital called me and told me they can discharge him. So on the 30th, I went to hospital and discharged him. We got him back home, and I guess 3 days later, on the 2nd, he was no more. So yeah, that in a nutshell is how he died. So how did I find out he died? On the 2nd, I think I had a really long, stressful day at work. Also, together with the whole, my dad is ill, trying to recover thing. So I usually go to the gym. And on the 2nd, I opted just to go to the gym, and I left my phone off so that nobody would call me, nobody would reach me. So once I was done with my workout, I saw my mom tried to call me, a cousin of mine tried to call me, and one of my brothers tried to call me. So I called my mom back first, and she told me, like, I guess 30 minutes before, she stepped out to get the old man some food for supper. And once she got back into the house, she went to the bedroom and found he was not breathing anymore. Yeah.
Okay, that's tough, to be honest, and very interesting at the same time. I saw a YouTube short of a hospice nurse, and she was saying that sometimes our loved ones wait for us to leave the room, or maybe the hospital room or the house or something, and then they leave, and maybe you were there the whole day, you were with them the whole day, and then when you step out for just 2 seconds, they're gone. It's like they were just waiting for you to leave. Yeah, so it's very interesting.
But even more interesting, my mom says that he really didn't want to leave in the hospital. So something I forgot to mention is during his stay in the hospital, he kept insisting that he wanted to go back home. So, yeah, my mom's logic behind that is that he didn't want to die in the hospital. It's like he knew he was going to die, but he just didn't want to go, like, live in the hospital.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. But well, I don't know. Maybe when we die, we'll know. We'll know just what we were doing right before we died.
Yeah.
Okay. So typically what happens when someone loses a loved one is you find out, and then now you have to let everyone know, right? Everyone who, cares about you, who would want to know, now you let them know. So I often wonder, okay, how does that feel like, having to tell everyone, call some people, even if it's just 2 people, how does that feel? Deliver the news? Does it, at this point, when you're now delivering the news to someone else, has it sunk in that this has happened? Or you're still like, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't? Half denial, half acceptance. What's going on during that stage?
Right. So I think I had accepted that he passed away because I had knowledge that he was ill for quite some time. So it wasn't really new. It was just shocking and unexpected because I didn't think he would pass on so early, and I didn't think he would pass on like without concrete signs of passing on, because he was showing concrete signs of improvement. So as for informing people, I didn't tell anyone until I think about 11 p.m. Despite knowing about it at, I guess, 5:30. So that's a whole 5.5 hours when I guess I was just trying to process the information. Definitely my whole family knew. The only people I guess I had to inform were people at work. So I just informed my immediate boss at the time. I just told her, hey, I can't come to work tomorrow. And she asked me why. And I was like, my dad died. So it was also a shock for her because, it's a very, it's very random news. So after I told my immediate boss about what happened, I was just given some time off. I was just told there's really no need to come back to work. I'm not saying I was fired. I just mean I was given some compassionate leave. So I was entitled to 2 weeks off. But at the time, I didn't want to just spend time alone. So I did take time off, but I would sometimes go to the office because I wanted a distraction. Otherwise, I would just sit in my house and think about everything, and I really didn't want that. But once I was given time off, the first thing I did was go home and just hang out with my mom, because I think she was not in a very good place. So I stayed home for about a week because there was no way I was gonna come back here and be alone and think about everything. So apart from informing my immediate boss and people I work with, I also had to inform some of my dad's friends. Some of them didn't know. So I had to call them and tell them, yeah, this is so-and-so's son. Unfortunately, so-and-so passed on. Yeah, and some of them were shocked. Some of them just told me sorry. Then also there were some of his friends who were our neighbors. We also had to tell them. I can just say informing people is not so easy. And interestingly enough, when you inform someone and then they tell you pole, like anytime you hear the word pole, sorry about that, it makes you feel horrible. It just makes you feel like, what? I'm gonna cry. And I didn't quite understand why that was, because this person is not trying to harm you in any way. This person is not trying to hurt you. They're just trying to console you. But once the consolation comes, you feel like breaking down even much worse than if you are not consoled. Yeah, so I think informing other people was tough, but it was very much necessary, because there were some people who I had not talked to in a really long time, and we got to talk because of that. One thing which I can say was are really kind of people. I remember a friend of mine, he's called John. I think John knows himself. So John saw a Facebook post by one of my family members where I was tagged. And then he texted me and told me, dude, I learned about your father's passing. I'm sorry about that. So I was like, okay, cool. So what John did is he organized like a fundraiser between myself and like people I was in campus in the same class with, and people raised some money and gave it to me, like to support with funeral expenses, which I really appreciate. I feel like if no one knew about it, would not have received any support. Then the other thing is also at work, I was given a lot of support. I was not being chased to, close on deadlines. I was not being told, hey, come back tomorrow. And they also did fundraise for me, which also assisted us with burial expenses. So I think there is importance in letting people know. I would say I'm not usually the type to discuss my problems or whatever's happening in my life, but sometimes it's important to let people know, because you never know what sort of support you'll receive. So moving away from informing people, I think the burial was the hardest bit, because everyone has their own views about what a burial should be like, and everyone has their own views about culture. And not to bash my own culture, but there are certain things which must be done when someone dies. So, number one, when you die, it's preferable that you are buried where you are born. So for me, that meant that we had to take my dad all the way back to Homa Bay, where he was born. So that's number one. Number two, the only way you'll be buried is if you have built a house on your own land. And unfortunately, my dad did not do that, because he had his own reservations about our culture, as well as what was expected of him. So he didn't really have like his own house where he was born, if you get what I'm meaning. So that was a challenge also. And directly proportional to that, that was also, believe it or not, a funeral expense, because you have to build a structure, and a structure which signifies your home, your family. So that was one challenge we faced, because on the one hand, everyone from home is saying, bring him back home, let's bury him here. And on the other hand, everyone else is like, let's just bury him wherever, which is, I think, where majority of the conflict about burying was. The main challenge we faced was deciding whether we would bury him in Nairobi or we would bury him at home. And ultimately, we just settled to bury him at home, because I think it would have been more difficult to bury him in Nairobi. So, unfortunately, because of this decision, we had to wait a little bit longer to bury him, because he passed on the 2nd, and we could only really bury him on the 17th, because we had to get the budget together. Included in the budget was a house which needed to be built. Well, not an entire house, but a structure signifying a house for the most part. And because you see, my father was married twice. He had a first wife and a mom. He needed to have 2 houses or 2 structures to signify each wife or each family. So that was also a factor. Then, of course, there had to be a budget for food. There had to be a budget for tents. There had to be a budget for coffin, transport from Nairobi to all the way home, accommodation, all of those things. All of those things had to be budgeted, which surprisingly was okay, because a lot of people were willing to contribute even without being asked. And we definitely did some fundraising internally within our family, and we were able to give him a send-off on the 17th, which was just 2 weeks after he passed on. So during the burial, I can say I was okay. I had an okay trip, because the good thing was that we traveled with family. We actually hired a bus. So we traveled with my family members and some friends who had come to support us. So I was surrounded with a lot of people who I could have good conversation with and who we could hang out with. And once we got home, it was good. Everyone was cheerful. Everyone was accommodating, and I saw a lot of faces I had not seen before or for a long time, and it was a very warm, friendly environment, and I really liked that. So, on the 17th, we finally laid him to rest. That was during the burial. And I think the hardest thing for me was to view his body. I really didn't understand everyone's fascination with viewing his body. I could not bring myself to do it. So there's that section in the burial where they let you view the body through the glass in the coffin. I could not do that. I did not do that. I found it very hard, so I didn't bother. I think when he was actually being put into the ground is when it sank in for me, and I was just a total mess. I broke down, and I think that's when it hit me that I'm never gonna see him again in person. I still see him in photos, but that's when it hit me that I would never see him again. So that was the burial bit of it. So after the burial, when people left, I was still getting a lot of check-ins by people. I had some friends who were also very nice to pass by, and I remember 3 people came over and cooked for me, which I really appreciated. They know themselves. I won't name names, but I do remember 3 people came and cooked for me, and I really loved it. I felt good. I felt appreciated. At work, people were also being very supportive. After the burial, I think the person who had it the roughest was my mother, because you live with someone for the better part of 30 years and then they're just gone. It's very difficult, because at this point she had gotten really used to him. They used to have a lot of banter, a lot of interesting conversations, and now that was not really something she could look forward to anymore. So yeah, I think that was the whole process of the burial. And after the burial, I think it was really tough, but somehow we managed to get through it. So in terms of support, I think a lot of people were really supportive, especially my friends, my relatives. A lot of people were kind enough to do things for me, which I really never expected them to do for me. And I really don't know how I can repay them, but wherever those people are, I would just want to say thank you. In terms of how my life changed after this whole experience, I would say, number one, most painful thing is that my dad was also my friend. He was definitely, he was my father. He had some level of authority over me, but he was also a pretty chill guy, and he was just my friend. So I miss my friend. We could hang out and talk about anything. We could talk about, the topics which he loved most, which honestly didn't necessarily spark much interest in me, were history and politics. But because it was him, we could have those conversations. And he really liked telling me stories about what happened in the past, about certain politicians and their ideologies, and what he thinks of the current crop of politicians and their ideologies. I really don't think I'll find anyone else who had that sort of interest and passion to talk about these things with. The other thing I notice is different is when I go home, I'm like, I think for the first month or so, whenever I would go home, I would think he's just on his seat. Like, he had this seat which was just his seat. So whenever I would open the door, I would see him on his seat and he would greet me very cheerfully. Yeah. Since he died, sometimes I would go home and think I'm opening the door to see him greet me very cheerfully. Then I remember that that might not happen. Apart from that, he really loved reading the newspaper over the weekend. And I remember before he died, I promised to buy him some newspapers over the weekend, but he didn't make it to the weekend. So currently, my mom's newspaper expenditure has really decreased because there's nobody to buy newspapers for. And yeah, I think that's what really changed for me. In terms of processing the grief of his death, I think one mistake I made was I didn't let myself feel what I was feeling for quite some time. So I would say I was really emotionally drained for about 4 or 5 months, but I just didn't realize it because I thought to myself, okay, he's died. Let's just feel it for like 2 weeks and get over it. But I realized moving forward that probably was not the right approach to take. I should have sat down and processed how I felt about his death, and really felt what I needed to feel. Because I was trying to be really strong for myself and I guess others. But I think when someone as close as that dies, you should really just have some space to be an emotional wreck and feel whatever you need to feel. So, yeah, I think I was too quick to try and get up on my feet and not have to process the emotions around his death. Right now, a year later, I do feel sad sometimes that he's not around, but at the same time, I feel like I'm at a better place. I feel like I've accepted that he's no longer here, but I'm still his son and I can do a lot of great things just to reflect that this was my father and he brought me into this world to achieve something, and I will do exactly that. So the only thing I do wish for was, you see, in the past year, I feel like I've made a lot of progress in life, and unfortunately, he's not been around to see that. And that's one thing which I would have wished for him to see, because I think I've been improving myself as a person, and he's not around to see the strides I've been making for myself. So I think that's the most challenging part for me. I think just to close off, what I would say is, for those of you who are going through something similar, just, when it happens, feel what you're feeling. Don't try and suppress your emotions. Don't try and be the strong one. Well, you have to be some level of strong, but don't try and be Superman when, something tragic has happened. Sometimes it's okay just to sit down and process how you feel and take everything as it is. On top of that, I think if you have people who you care about, you should make some effort to, be with them, hang out with them, take photos, record their voice, just be there with them and for them and enjoy the moment, because you really don't know when the last one is gonna be.
That was very interesting to listen to. I came here thinking that, we're going to talk about, I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting to hear about the caregiving part. I don't know why, yet I know it's part of it. The healthcare system bit at the beginning, and learning that there's no coverage for people above 74, especially the private insurance, and cultural norms. Oh my God. Wow. That's very interesting. And I find it interesting because there are probably good enough reasons for why people follow the cultural norms. But at the same time, think about someone who's really low. Maybe they have an extremely huge medical bill, and then they need a house built in order for the burial to take place. That's very, and yet they're grieving, it's a lot. So I think I've learned something there. And I actually read an article recently of people choosing to be cremated for such reasons. You just state in your will, I want to be cremated, period. After 2 days, cremate me and get it done and over with. I don't want stories. But now I can imagine the family being told, yeah, cremate the person. But those ashes, they have to be buried where they were born. You have to build a house. Very interesting. So all these things come into play even while you're going through the loss. And that's the reality of it also. Thank you for putting it all into context and for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, glad to be here. Glad to talk about it. Really appreciate the time you've lent me to speak about the same.
All right. And with that, come to the end of our episode. See you next time. Bye.